All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm here with Pete Stilwell, the senior producer of StarCraft Remastered and Classic Games. It's good to see you're still well.
Howdy. I've never heard that joke before.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Not ever.
I'm sure. Did you know winter is coming?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But he's here to talk about, we had Brian on yesterday. And obviously StarCraft Remastered just released, but he's here. We're going to focus more on the matchmaking and esports and 1v1 of everything.
Yeah.
So the serious things.
Yeah. Brian, I guess, artfully dodged those questions.
Well, like I said, I don't know anything about that. But the thing a lot of people, I think, are going to be interested in, and that'll keep people playing, I mean, people play the campaign and all that. But first, tell me what it is you do as a senior producer. What do you seniorly produce? And what does a normal day look like for you?
Yeah, that's a cool question. Blizzard's interesting in that the production role is kind of different per team. Like, if you go talk to somebody on Team 1 with Heroes or StarCraft, they may be doing a different job than we have. So on classic games, I think the best description is maybe a conduit from the players to the developers. We spend a ton of time on the forums or traveling. I think I went to Korea at least 12 times in the past year to represent the voice of the player. And then beyond making sure that the priorities are right for what we're going to be developing, we manage the schedule and do those kind of boring things that nobody else wants to do. I think you're kind of a generalist problem solver of, hey, I don't want to do this thing. Says
somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, and then you're the one who rolls up your sleeves and mucks it out.
So you don't like. As a senior producer, I assume a lot of the time you define what you're supposed to be doing, and you're trusted to do that. And who is, what is kind of the, because Classic Games is smaller than the other teams, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's on a first-name basis, I assume, and
sure.
Working with each other. But above you, there's, I assume, just the head of the entire project?
Yeah, Rob Breidenbecker, who's our VP.
So you pretty much know almost everything there is to know about the product in some way, in the project.
Oh, you're setting a trap.
Yeah, there you go. So you should be able to
He's
answer
a StarCraft
any
player.
question. Any question I have about StarCraft Remastered, you should have a direct and concise answer, is what you're trying to say?
Maybe not concise. I do tend to meander.
We have time.
Yeah.
We have time.
Yeah.
If you lift the mic up a little, be all fancy. All right, there you go. They want to hear your voice.
I'm sorry. We've been talking a lot, and I think I'm losing my voice. So, sorry, guys.
It happens. Mic in face procs. Thank you for the production tip, everybody. But so you said you went. I think this is what I want to talk about the most is StarCraft Remastered, and now obviously I'm talking to people who a lot of them didn't play Brood 1. They didn't play StarCraft 1. They might play StarCraft 2, or they might just watch, but why remaster StarCraft 1, at least in your opinion?
I think the most important reason for classic games in general, like maybe this is the bigger agenda, Blizzard is lucky to have dedicated, like truly dedicated communities around its various games. And when we took a look at SC and War 3 and Diablo 2, we were kind of sad with the state that they were in, and just getting it to run was difficult at that point, and you'd boot it up and you'd get the thing we coined as 80s Kerrigan face, where she'd be like magenta and a bunch of crazy colors because the palette system was broken and designed for old architecture that doesn't exist anymore. So we kind of looked at it as the oldest of the classics that still has a huge amount of concurrency daily, and said this is where we're going to start. Like we love all of our classics equally, but we did have to start somewhere as a team to kind of learn how to do this and get back into those old code bases. And the further back you go in Blizzard's history, like the less there is to find. So StarCraft was also the hardest in that respect. and that we found only a handful of the source assets over the course of the entire thing, and luckily enough we found the source code, but we had to remake all the tools and you know, all the art from scratch. It was an amazing journey, but it really just boils down to the fact that as long as we have passionate players around a game, we want to support it. And we had never intended for, you know, Warcraft or Starcraft or Diablo to stay in Legacy Battle.net. It was always the company's agenda to bring them into the modern stack with you know, Blizzard Battle.net 2.0, and it just had been, hey, WoW got huge and we got busy, and then there's this exciting new things over here, and you know, your priorities are what they are, and it was just finally time. And so you know, Rob, as one of the, you know, like original 25 employees of the company, is the perfect guy who knows, you know, that era and, you know, what we want to get back to with these games. So we're lucky, and you know, even Brian was involved in making the original game, so we have this cool team of guys who were a part of it, and then folks like me who grew up playing these games. And like, the reason I'm at Blizzard is StarCraft, right? Like, that's how much it...
The next generation.
Yeah. So we have this cool opportunity to take the passion of, you know, folks like me who love these games and, you know, feel honored to get to be a part of them. And then you've got the guys who remember actually doing it and have been great guides along the way. And you know, I really enjoy the interaction with the community. I'm sure if some of the folks in the stream spend any time on the forums, they're aware of hopefully the passion that I bring to communicating and trying to be transparent and really weighing everything and trying to listen a lot more than we talk, so that we are making informed decisions. We are making, you know, the right decisions about hotkeys and things of that nature that are new, that do kind of put risk to that balance, and that we want to make StarCraft be enjoyed by a new generation the way it was originally, and why it's so revered. We don't want to shatter that. So again, I told you I was going to meander, so here we are.
We're setting the scene is what we're doing, because you mentioned how it's a new generation, it's a new game. It's on, you can play it on a monitor that's bigger than 16 inches and square, and actually it looks good. I mean, I think it probably was very difficult, but the art was not the big discussion of like how necessarily it should look. I think the big discussion was, how do we change the game, and if we do, or like how do you implement a new Battle.net system, matchmaking, and everything surrounding that. And once again, you mentioned you went to probably the place that inspired StarCraft to be the first game to kind of get this kind of treatment.
Sure.
Just tell me why you went to Korea 12 times.
So as Rob developed in his career, he traveled internationally a lot, and watched the IGRs, the game rooms in Korea, emerge, and understood when you'd walk in at one point, you know, 95% of what people were doing was playing StarCraft, you know, back in, you know, the early 2000s. And we're lucky also to have global presence, truly, with offices in Korea or Versailles and around the world. So we have a pretty good line on you know, where the passion lies, and you know, Korea is obviously the most dedicated, and has the largest community. The game rooms still being prevalent, still have a lot of folks playing in the game rooms, and you know, it's still usually in the top 5 games being played in Korea, which is you know, insane.
I mean, obviously, it's in comparison. For comparison, StarCraft 2 is in the double digits usually in Korea, so we're talking millions of players every month. But particularly now, I guess this is more personal than the Blizzard thought. But why do you think people are still playing StarCraft in Korea so often, even when there are much newer, much easier games that have come out?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on part of it. It is the difficulty. It is so Ki-Bong Cook, who's the boy, he was a former pro. He now works in the Korean office for us. He did an interesting thing with me where every time I'd come, he'd ask me questions about how I understood Korean culture and really wanted to make sure that I got the mentality more so than just, hey, we like the game. He wanted to make sure I knew why. And there is this desire to prove that you are the alpha at something, right? And in a game that unquestionably to them is the perfect balance where it just comes down to you as the human being capable of the win, that therein lies the fun that with this game you can prove that you are the best. You haven't cheesed, you haven't done found the one thing that you can exploit to.
I'm getting all dramatic here right in the middle of that story about Korea, but I want people to be able to see you.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at
all
you.
These gestures. All right.
Yeah, I do talk with my hands. So
just to recap on that, you went to Korea and a former Brood War Pro player. Mm-hmm. I think I assume we're talking like early 2000s.
Yeah.
A former
so
Brood
early
War
you've never heard of him.
I was still working on 3rd or 4th grade, probably around there.
Yep. Oh, you want me to continue?
Yeah,
sure.
Yes, of course.
Sure. So it's this perfectly balanced game. The fact that whether you're Flash or whoever, you're unquestionably the best at it. And then there's also, as I was mentioning, when 95% of what people were doing in the game rooms was playing this game, that started to create a shared experience, right? So just like kids growing up playing baseball or any other sport, like that becomes still something you can speak to. And I think that's one of the other big things that's made it sticky is that, if we're sitting around having some soju and beer, at K Barbecue, we can still talk about StarCraft. We still have that shared experience, like regardless where you're from. In Korea, if you're a 30-something male, most likely you can sit down with anybody and have a conversation about the game. And the chat channels were the other major contributor to its success. It was an emergent way to communicate, and because the other reason for the game rooms originally was for people to go use email back before they had home computers and things, or phones. So they'd be going there to communicate, and then they found out that with the chat channels, like, I don't even have to send a stupid email. I can get 4 of my buddies in there, and we can just have a conversation. And you can, more easily communicate to, up to 25 people at once in that case. And similar to a WoW guild, like for me over time, like people will still go sit down, pay their $1 for the hour and talk, and not even necessarily play, and just stay connected to those people. Like they might have a buddy in Busan that they've never met before in person.
So it wasn't necessarily just the game; it was the entire culture around it.
Yep. Yeah.
And I guess that was at a time, like Korea is a lot more densely populated than say the U.S., right? So
in certain areas, like in Seoul, like a hefty portion of their population is just in Seoul. So
and was it partially maybe the timing of StarCraft when it came out, that Korea has booming technology market, and then this is the game that actually takes advantage of it?
Yes.
So it kind of hit at the right time in the right place.
Yeah. Precisely. I mean, you've said it well. I don't need to say
nothing to
else.
expand on.
Right.
But was there a precedent for esports in Korea? Like, was esports a thing before StarCraft?
No, not really. Like it's if it was, I'm not aware of it, so I don't want to be misquoted. But for certainly they call it the father of esports there. Because even if there were other, fledgling esports, none of them took off the way, none of them could get 100,000 people to show up on a beach in Busan.
And that happened, and then things similar to it happened many times.
Right.
And actually, to this day, people are showing up. Maybe not 100,000, but
yeah, they estimate around 30,000 people showed up at the launch event that we did.
That's pretty. Yeah. That's a bit.
Yeah,
it's a few people.
And the cool thing is you see a lot of young people there too. Like there's an interest to, I think, to understand what my big brother or my dad is talking about, and maybe get into the game. And I think
20 years is another generation of people coming to it. I've heard some stories, especially the crew guys, a couple heartfelt like Facebook video moments of a 30-year-old dad and his 10-year-old son playing co-op next to each other, and the son actually teaching his dad like how to do it because he played Brood War back in the day, but he doesn't play StarCraft 2. Stuff like that. But is that a commonplace thing in Korea, you think?
I don't know if it's commonplace yet.
It's not the majority, but...
Yeah, but I think there's certainly potential for it. And that's also where some of the modern conveniences come in, and where we saw opportunities with the matchmaker to give more accessibility to a younger generation. Like all of the games that we have now, you click a button, that are competitive. You click a button and someone is found for you, by and large, right? Like whether it's a mobile game or a PC game or console, like you are given most of those things. Whereas you used to have to go into the chat channel and talk smack until somebody was like, yeah, I got you. I am the best Protoss here, and I'm going to beat your ass. So it's great to be able to offer that. And again, going back to that, like the real reason I'm doing this is to back up that smack talk and prove that I'm number one. Once we refine the ELO-based MMR that we're using, like we should start to be able to say you are number one. So I think there's a lot of potential and excitement around Matchmaker making the game more, open to not just the folks that are already dedicated and around it, but hopefully bringing in some new blood and getting people excited to learn, because first you must learn StarCraft.
That's the hard. Well, learning might not be the hardest part. It's the playing that comes next. But we'll get into the matchmaker and just the mechanics of everything and your take. I talked with Brian, but he probably has a different perspective on why all the units work certain ways. But first, so what about outside of Korea? What about America, Canada, Europe in general? What was the kind of feedback there? Who were you talking to? Was there really any community to really interact with when you decided to start making this game?
Yeah, so spent a lot of time with TL.
Team Liquid.
Yeah, great resource there. And then we started talking to Heinrich behind SCM Draft 2 about the editor, because there's a wealth of knowledge there. We've talked to the Brood War API folks, like generally just trying to cast a wide net. To have a fundamental understanding of not just the competitive play, because there is a depth with UMS and the custom maps that we want to get to, as some of the roadmap in the near future, because we feel like we're getting to a good place with the competitive aspect, and we'll continue to expand on those features as well. We have a lot of ambition for this game still, so. I feel like we're just at the start of a wonderful new era for StarCraft.
All right, and I mean, I guess tying into that, does Blizzard have any plans for a Blizzard, maybe not Blizzard-sponsored, not Blizzard-backed, but sponsored event similar to WCS in Brood War in any fashion? Or is there anything you can say towards that end?
We're exploring it. Like, we don't have anything official to, say here's that roadmap, but... we see how passionate folks are, globally for the game and for wanting to watch great competition, and that's also why we wanted the matchmaker to be globally thinking. Where if you are, the best guy in Sweden, you can potentially be matching outside of, the EU instance of the servers, so that you can start to elevate your game.
The matchmaking, you're saying, is global.
Yes.
Especially when you get to a higher level, maybe there are less players. You're more likely to match outside of your region.
Right.
So even, this is just to clarify for people who might not understand it, but even if you log in with Europe or US West or Korea, you still, with the remastered matchmaker, you have a potential to play against players of other regions.
Yeah. And we've got the Frontier League right now, as we're calling it, as we kind of refine the matchmaker. We don't want to start putting too much emphasis on MMR and things like that until we have more confidence in it. We don't want we don't need people upset about it being wrong if it potentially is. So we want to have this kind of first season to work out the kinks, and when the real season 1 starts. We'll have confidence in, like I've talked to you about. We watched you winning and not getting credit for your stats and things like that. because of a server issue, and it was awesome to. I mean, that's one of the awesome things about the fact that people are streaming now is we can watch it happen in real time, and that helps us firefight. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once the matchmaking takes off, and I mean, I don't know how many people you're seeing. I know it's in the tens of thousands now. I'm ranked 27,380 in global, and I'm above the starting point.
Right.
So obviously there are plenty of people playing, but you mentioned also, just kind of as an aside, like team game matchmaking. Is that 2v2? Or are you talking 3v3, 4v4?
I think definitely next will be 2s, and then hopefully expanding into 3s, FFA, and maybe not just competitive. Like I was talking about UMS.
It's more just to be able to match with people.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be awesome if you could similarly match for
just big game hunters? Or
yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah. So things outside of the norm, and again have that kind of convenience and find people that are just as passionate as you without necessarily having to go use the join create.
Yeah, I think the system of the chat channels and calling people out is about a decade in the past at this point, with all the conveniences, because there's also the ability to use the Battle.net app. So if people, maybe someone jumps on and says, okay, let's actually play, because StarCraft is a pretty hard game to play 1v1, so I think custom games still have a ton of potential.
Yep.
And there was also, Brian mentioned, some changes to the editor coming, updates really, for map makers and UMS map makers as well, like competitive and less competitive maps.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The big first feature that's almost done is variable width ramps and more cardinal directions. So originally you just had 2, and they were a fixed width, and as you've watched over the years, the best competitive maps and a lot of UMS maps are breaking that essentially to have variable width ramps. So that's one of the first things we're like, that's actually pretty easy to implement, all things considered, and then aesthetically, as beautiful as the game has become, you don't have to have the kind of torn textures that end up being used to create those ramps. So as I was saying, we're talking with Heinrich from SCM Draft 2 about potential for the fact that he's already way ahead of where the old default editor is. So we want to leverage that work instead of trying to reproduce it or waste our time trying to surpass him. So I think there's a lot of potential to just unlock some stuff directly there, but we also want to offer more tools that help a map maker make maps more quickly, because especially for competitive maps, we've been told like, hey, I can make a map in a week, and it's then the 2 months of testing it and debugging and making sure that one of my mineral patches isn't in a weird position where probes are going to go around to mine it and people are going to lose faith that it's a good map. So doing things like that to streamline people's flow and have higher confidence faster. Like you want your robot armies to do good, so that's what we're going to try to do is offer more to the map maker, because it is a great accessible editor.
Do you see something kind of similar to the StarCraft 2 arcade being added, or just the custom lobbies will be refined?
I wouldn't rule anything out. Like, again, I don't plan on, or we don't plan, try not to use we don't plan on not listening to what the community wants next. First I need Lieutenant Lima to stop yelling at me on the forums about the 5 bugs that we keep missing and things like that. So that's priority 1.
Called out?
Yeah. No, I love Lieutenant Lima. It's our first priority to make sure everybody feels like, hey, it's there, we're cool with it
and
now.
It works.
Yeah, it works the way it's supposed to. And then let's talk about those next big things. And kind of like we did as we were adding the new leaderboards and the profile page, how we shared them early and got some feedback. Like, I'd like to start that process even sooner, before we even have comps, where it's like, hey, here's the 5 potential things we could be working on next. Let's make a thread and talk about it as a group and figure out what is going to deliver the most value and be the most engaging. And as I said, I think we owe love to the people outside of the competitive scene directly, because there are a huge number of people that are just playing UMS. And we should be helping them out and giving them cool features and
making it easier to
well.
get into lobbies and stuff like that. I know some people get kind of confused on that point, like how do I get into a game? Also, just a side note, especially for the larger games, because of the way the game is set up, if you have players from all across the world, there can be some latency, is a nice way to put it. But are there any plans to try to alleviate that?
Yeah,
or is that just part of it?
That's much more of a technical problem than like do we need to talk about this feature that we do want to address. We don't have a timeline on when that would be available, but yeah, we would like to again have the robot army deal with that aspect and be able to flex and be like a more modern game where it tries to figure out what settings you should be playing on instead of forcing you to adjust, especially for newer players who aren't familiar that you can go into options.
Gonna get turned off pretty quick.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating, understandably. We've made it look like a modern game. We need to offer some of those conveniences as well. All
right. So let's talk a little bit more about the design in general. I talked with Brian, but everybody, and you're the senior producer, right? So you have your own perspective. What kind of pushback did you get? Or I guess that's a little bit of a leading question. What were some of the major points when you were designing? Like you're deciding, do we change 12 unit selection, things like that, and then do we let them have hotkeys? What are some examples, especially from I'm going to say mostly from the Korean community? What kind of comments and criticisms did they have?
I mean, that's another thing. I think when you look at the forums, anybody who suggests changing, the number of units and things of that nature, usually gets shouted down just by the community itself as like, maybe you need to spend a little bit more time understanding StarCraft before you make suggestions.
Get off my lawn.
I think there's potential for maybe like those becoming custom options, but I don't think that's a high priority right now. Like we're here to restore classic games and keep classic games classic. Blizzard will continue to make new games. I love watching you play StarCraft 2, and StarCraft 2 has a lot of those conveniences, and it's a brilliant game, but it's a different game, right? Like I can't stand when people say one is better than the other. They're different games. Like I love watching them both. They both have their own.
They have the same name, though, so they must fight to see who is the victor.
Yeah,
this is the internet.
Yeah,
there can only be one.
Okay, maybe as a game developer, I just think of it differently. That iteration is why mechanics have changed over time, why they've gotten better, why there's new challenges. We as humans master those things and then want a new challenge to master, and that's what you can kind of see compartmentalized between different games that have a 1, a 2, a 3 after them. Is usually that type of evolution of that thing the designer wanted to do and they didn't have time or they didn't have the technology or what have you, ends up getting implemented down the road, and then whatever trappings are around it are to me okay, and that's
it's just how it is.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine especially because StarCraft 2, like we mentioned, never really took off the way, like it didn't hit that niche that StarCraft 1 did at the time. There's just too much competition and people still playing Brood War as well. So that, can you say that is a significant amount of the reason that StarCraft Remastered looks like it does is just the passion of the Korean community and the size in general?
Yeah, and that's also kind of like our purpose as classic games is what I've really learned over the past few years. Like I tend to as a player, probably as I just alluded to, I kind of level up with the games and follow what's new and play new games, and have never gotten so truly affixed to any one game. But what I've learned through this process is that we do have players and a community that doesn't want to leave a certain game, and we have hardline guys and gals for Diablo 2 and Warcraft 3 and StarCraft, and and that's brilliant. That's wonderful. Like that's why our team's here. As long as the community's there wanting the game, we'll be here to support it. And that's kind of our unwritten agreement that as long as there's that passion there and that desire to have it, whether it's SC2, SC1, whatever, like hopefully all games classic at some point under our halo will have us curating the need of that individual community.
To not so subtly imply, you mentioned Warcraft 3 and Diablo 2. So is this the final project for the classic games team, or will they be moving on to other projects as well?
So we have a new map pool for War 3 on a PTR right now. Again, we're trying to be responsive to what each community is asking for, and while War 3 isn't outright broken, there's still a sense of like, hey, we could tweak the math a bit and achieve a slightly better balance. 120's been really rocking Undead lately, so he's, I think, lifting perception of Undead. But until recently, everybody was like, Undead really only has 2 options for their heroes, and they're very predictable in the way they have to play, and thus it's it's not like StarCraft where you can change your strategy.
Was there any consideration at any time for possible balance changes? I assume that how serious were the discussions of do we actually change any of the units even a little bit?
Oh, for Star?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, not at all. No.
Not at all. It was never even on the table.
No.
Not even like the Vulture has 5 less HP or something like that.
No.
All right.
No. And similarly, when we first started talking to the pros, they were like, you can't even change the silhouettes or the animations because my brain is wired to see those things without really seeing them. And if you start messing with any of that stuff, like you're going to wreck my ability to play. And those were like some of the really good...
Well, already having 16:9 aspect ratio as a whole...
So that was also one that we were surprised by, that they were like, it just doesn't matter. Like immediately, they were like, it doesn't matter. Because these guys have played SC2 as well. Like they're like, yes, you have a little bit larger field of view, but most of our life is spent looking at the mini-map and clicking around quickly, and it just...
I've watched some of the streams of the Korean pro players, and they're playing Remastered, of course, but they're all playing in 4.3.
Yeah.
So they're just used to it. And
right.
And I've asked a couple, like, they don't seem to mind.
Yeah, and some even said, look, my mouse doesn't have to travel as far. Like, that to me is a difference.
All right.
Yeah, so it's... And at the launch event, amusingly, as an anecdote for how this is working, Bisu still plays with a PS2 keyboard.
I was like, wait a second. But yeah.
I mean, he had an XP machine until recently as well, with that keyboard setup.
You have to restart the computer every time you want to plug in a keyboard.
So, well, the rigs that we had at the launch event in Korea weren't set up to accept PS2, of course. So they had to go.
It's 2017.
Yeah,
why would you need that?
They had to go get one and plug it in, and so he was running the SD version of the game in 4x3, and the other guys were playing remastered in widescreen, and he came out 50-50. So that seems to say like it's truly not the advantage.
Looks don't matter.
Yeah, it's how good the player is, and you can play remastered however you want, and that's what we intended from the start.
That's why that F5 key is there as well.
Love the F5,
just for a little bit of live nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. And to prove that again, because we were like, it was one of the first things. Like when we started showing it internally, people were like, "What'd you do?" And we're like, what do you mean? Like, all this is brand new.
This is
like,
how I remember
it's so
it,
beautiful,
though.
Yeah. And then, so we put the F5 in just as much for testing so that you could make sure that, that things were flipping properly. But we put the F5 in just as much so that people would realize the rose-colored glasses, kind of moment. Yeah.
Even in the menus, too.
Mm-hmm.
But, all right, what haven't we touched on? I was going to say something. But, like, customized hotkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a concern for pros? Do they consider it, like, potentially an advantage? Like, being able... Like, I have Siege on E and Unsiege on D, which reduces the possibility of messing up how my Siege tanks are set up, for example.
Yeah. So that was... I think it's still a contentious topic, to be honest. But there was enough tipping the scale toward doing it. And one of the reasons why the F keys and the groupings are not bindable at the moment is because they were truly standardized, regardless of your keyboard, right? When the game shipped originally in French, Italian, German, and Spanish, and English, your hotkeys were different based on your language. So you could potentially find a different language that worked better for you and play that way. And of course, there wasn't really good protection around it, so people figured out how to go modify the files for the hotkeys anyway. So, like, people were already changing it. It was already part of the landscape of Brood War in a lot of ways. So, whether you want to play the standard way and that's the way you learned it, that's great. But it's again not something that isn't a fair balance for either player. Both of us are capable of changing them. Both of us are capable of then being the best we can be. And again, that's what it's all about is
well, I think that ties in. We actually have someone commenting, mouse clicks freezing blocking keyboard inputs.
Mm-hmm.
But like many things in Brood War, you described this to me, it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. Yes.
So in Brood War, if you're holding the mouse button down, you're not able to input from the keyboard, and that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Welcome to
Brood
War.
That's the way the code's written. Yeah.
Don't want to. It had too many conflicting things before. They just said nope, one thing at a time, just very, very quickly.
Right.
And so if you don't have a definitive answer, you heard it here. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
But that's how meticulous you were. Like, even things like, I wonder if there's someone on the team, maybe they didn't play Brood War, is like, this isn't responding how it's supposed to, and thought about changing it.
Right.
But then go to realize, well, wait a second, that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Are there any other examples of things like that?
Yeah. When we first released 118 back in March or April, we had a few issues with inputs that didn't go through for a different reason. It was because we had a frame rate cap of 300 because we didn't want to melt people's computers. We were melting people's computers. We put that cap in, and that also meant your APM was then capped at 300. That's why a lot of people were losing their commands that were really high-quality players, because they were going over...
One of those 1% problems.
Yeah. But again, like that's all it takes to sully the experience and
there was
make us liars, because
that.
we promised we wouldn't break the game. Yeah, so when you watch pros, violently shaking their mice in the old competitions, that's because the screen refreshes at the rate of things that are happening. So if you're moving your mouse, you're actually causing a refresh.
So wait, you're telling me that the pros, even for seemingly no reason, will whip their mouse around the screen so the screen refreshes faster, so that way they can see more?
No, so that their actions happen. Remember, the refresh has to... So the actions are tied to the refreshes. So
there has to be an action essentially after an action, even if it's only moving the mouse.
Yeah. Well, you need a screen refresh to make the action happen. So when we capped it at 300, again, if you're at 400 APM, that means you're losing 100 of those actions. So that's why they used to violently shake their mice, because there wasn't a refresh cap, but if they shook their mouse, they essentially raised their refresh rate in an equal amount to their APM.
Well,
pretty
welcome
cool.
to Brood War.
Pretty cool, huh? Yeah.
The things you want.
Yeah, and well, the unfortunate thing was that we didn't see that one coming and released it that way, and had to figure out what the hell was going on to fix it.
Nobody has 300 APM at the office regularly?
Not regularly, no. Like, I'll say it. Like, we could only get so much of David Kim's time or whoever, right? Like, we certainly at Blizzard have some folks that are at that level, but most of us spend more time writing code or what have you than playing the game at this point. So, unfortunately, but yeah.
That's a good question. Is there anything on StarCraft Remastered, like, I'm talking maybe by the end of the year, at least early next year, are there any big features? You've already mentioned the plan for matchmaking is once everything's worked out, and obviously there were some things to work out at release, as usually there are. Once it's all worked out, then there will be a new season. And how are the leagues going to work? Are they going to be similar to StarCraft 2 leagues, like bronze, silver, gold, platinum? Or what is the plan for that?
The plan is to kind of emulate where the community ended up with the letter ranks.
Oh, D minus, D.
Yeah, get ready to be
D
sad.
D minus. And then there's a couple A players out there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. And will it be transparent? Like A, B is 2,500 MMR, B plus is 2,600.
So it will be transparent what you are, but it may have to be variable in order to have.
I mean, it would change over time, but you'll still have an idea of at least around that day where you need to go to get to the next round.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
And is there going to be some sort of, I don't know what it would be, but some sort of benefit to playing more games in one day or anything like that, or just basic MMO?
So we're trying to put some specific things in there to discourage people hitting a rank and then stopping. You know, like, hey, I made number 1. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the glory. So not necessarily incentivizing playing more, aside from the fact that, you know, you're going to get better at the game and increase your odds of raising your MMR.
StarCraft is a very self-motivated game either way, though.
So it's, it, like I said, it's elo based, so you know, you'll move quickly and then kind of get, you know, refinements once you hit your kind of ceiling, your current ceiling, and then you'll rise gradually.
That's actually a good question for the other side of it. I think I can answer it, but about new players and accessibility when they get into ranking, what is stopping them from losing 10 games in a row? And I think the answer is nothing. Welcome to StarCraft. You're going to lose.
Sure.
In StarCraft 2, I lost 75 of my first 100 games and probably like 48 of the first 50.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I don't think there's no ranking system that can really account for that. I mean, there's going to be will new players be starting against bottom-of-the-ladder players, or will it be a placement system kind of like StarCraft 2 where it kind of tries to find?
Yeah, you have to have placement. And again, like, you'll see, you know, quantifiably large jumps at first during, I think it's roughly the first 20 still. Something.
It's the same, like in the StarCraft 2, you have 5 placement matches, but your placements aren't done for about 25 games.
Yeah. So and again, we're still refining it, so some of those are...
You don't want it to be too long to find, like, players who are better.
Right.
You don't want to take too long to find your skill level.
Yeah, because then you just end up having really good people stomping the not-so-good ones, and that's obviously frustrating.
What about unranked matchmaking?
We've talked about that. Yeah, that's one of those things that we were kind of surprised to see, and is definitely on our radar at this point. Like I said, hopefully, you know, right now we're fixing, you know, the live issues that are the hot topics, and then in the next, you know, 4 to 6 weeks is when we'll really be deciding what's going to be next, and that's when we'll start engaging and posting what we're thinking and what we're thinking based on what the community is asking for. So
your input is actually valued.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, we
and especially, I would assume, lower level players rather than that, because the higher level ones know how it's going to work, know who they're going to be playing. But players who might not have played Brood War before, I think they're the ones probably to listen to about how matchmaking is set up, especially.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and for the desire for an unranked, or you know, like we were talking about earlier, you know, even just a league where you can go play big game hunters all the time, right?
Is there a plan for separate race MMR?
Yes. Yeah. The MMR will be race based, so that if you're really good at one and not so much at another, and you're playing random, you'll still, you know, be hitting people within your target.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. You can learn. Well, is there anything else about matchmaking, either in the near future or the less near future, that you want to talk about, or that we haven't covered?
I think we're pretty good.
A big comment is why can't the free-to-play players play matchmaking? But pretty much the only thing Remastered has feature-wise over the free-to-play version of the game is obviously the graphics. And matchmaking.
Sure.
Is there anything else?
Yeah, no. There was a lot of internal debate over it. You know, ultimately, all of the new things are what make Remastered, and that's why they're in there. We'll see how the numbers are, and if you know, if things need to change over time, we can. You know, it's not impossible to change decisions. I think that's one thing this team's been pretty good at, is listening and admitting when it's wrong, and making changes if necessary. I don't think we're at that point currently. I think, as a lot of people point out, it's not like we're charging an arm and a leg for it, and we're providing, I think, a ton of value for what the price points are on the game.
But I bought Brood War in 1998.
So did I?
And I didn't, but so why don't I get it for free today? But another thing, I completely lost my train of thought there. Just completely gone.
Yeah. I mean, look at it as an expansion pack,
also,
ultimately, right?
Is there a plan for some quality of life improvements? Like, one of the big things is, like in SC2, you have lobby link. Like, you can just type in a chat channel and people can join the game. I mean, even that step from look in the games and this is the name and the password is still a longer step.
Right.
Or like inviting friends directly.
Yes. We plan on doing all that quality of life
so
stuff.
just the basic, all that can be 2017.
Yeah.
So
well,
that's
maybe.
Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
Closer. All right.
Yeah. Like I said, we'll similar. So 118 was an awesome experience, I think, from a teaching us how to do it right. And at one point, I
know there was a lot of things that broke. In the first test.
Yeah.
Patches.
Like 118 was like the actual violent change from 116 to the modern game, and that was where the majority of our real work went into the game and going live, and where we discovered the issues and the misses, like the APM cap, or the APM cap. But I think out of that, we showed the community we were going to listen, and that we are responsive to feedback, and we learned that is what we should be doing, and it is the right path to take. So like I said, we will come up with this kind of laundry list of, hey, here's the big ticket items that we're interested in doing and that clearly you guys are asking for, and help us refine them, help us prioritize them, and then we'll just power our way through. Like, StarCraft Remastered has a dedicated crew. Like, we're not going anywhere. Like I said, I think this is just the first step in a really bright future for StarCraft, and we're excited to start offering even more new, cool, hot things.
Would some of those, I've seen that comment a few times, would some of those cool things be skins? Are we looking at more skins here?
Skins are
And what kind of pushback was there on having any skins at all?
We didn't really get any pushback. Like, just putting them on the town halls was a way to not have to make it too over the top, and just give a cool little loyalty thing for signing up early. The issue with StarCraft is that it's still a 2D game. So we have to load everybody's things all the time, especially if you're in a 4v4. If we all have different skins, then everybody's skins have to get loaded, and they're much heavier than loading models. So there's potential to turn this into such a massive game that you'd require ridiculous amounts of RAM, and just generally would negatively affect the experience. So.
Are you saying the computers aren't good enough to play Brood War with skins in 2017?
I'm saying we start to leave people behind if we do. Yeah, the vast majority, 85% of people would probably be able to run it, but we're in general trying not to leave a bunch of players that are loyal out in the cold because they can't afford a better machine or something. Like, this game is still really popular in about a lot of areas that don't have the infrastructure and don't have the ultimate new gaming rig yet. So we want those players on board. They're a dedicated part of our community. We love them, and we don't want to make a bunch of decisions that break them, especially just for cosmetics. But
okay.
I'm not saying it's off the table, but it's one of those things that the technical ramifications are bigger, I think, than the gameplay ones, because everybody should be able to just turn them off and say, show me the vanilla version of the game. I don't want to see them, and that's fine. But again, there's other issues that come with it.
So on that same note, though, like, what about other things like announcer packs, things like SE2 has sprays? Some people are into that. Are there any plans for those type of things along those lines?
So we don't currently have any real plans around like that type of content. The things we want to do are much more the quality of life, much more the deepening the experience types of things. Like that is more of our immediate priority than selling a bunch of other stuff.
All right, good to hear. Well, depends on who you are and what you like.
Yeah, no.
So I think the one thing we didn't really touch on was the observing, and just because that's how a lot of people see the games.
Yeah.
A lot more people are going to watch a tournament than play every day.
Yep.
And all of that.
Yeah.
So there's been updates to the observing. You can now see supplies potentially. I mean APM, but APM. What kind of decisions were made when it came to what do we add, and are there plans for more things in the future?
Yeah. So we talked quite a bit with the shoutcasters, with the guys that actually control the viewing when in observer mode, and to just people who are really passionate about watching the game. And one of the consistent points of feedback was like, Brood War is exciting because there's a sense of discovery. You don't have the production tab. You don't have, this is about to be happening tab, and that thus isn't isn't lowering the sense of anticipation about what decision is he going to make, like what is the next move, what state is the game really in. So it allows that big moment, those big plays to happen without, again, showing them in the pipe. So we did have a production tab and some of those other things when we first started demoing it to them, and they were like, even if we get there eventually, let's not do it for V1. It would be too traumatic. It would change too much. And that was another good one of those lessons of like, hey, yeah, like we will be here. We can iterate. We can add. It's much harder to subtract. Once somebody gets something, like, say putting hotkeys in 118 and then taking them out, that can lead to some pretty hurt feelings. So what we do want to do is put those types of things in replays, right? So we want replays to be a wealth of information so that, again, you can learn more quickly, see what's really happening. Frequently when you're watching a replay, you already know the outcome. You already know what's happening. So seeing, how high-level players are...
Maybe a worker tab or something like that to compare. Sure.
Yeah. And resources spent, all those types of things that you want in the moment, not just in the analysis at the end of the game, and that will make replays really epic. So that's one of the other kind of big ticket features we're hoping to get to.
Of course, there's also the zooming in and out, which is always
yeah, and auto
it's very
following,
dramatic.
And all the cool
the
stuff.
auto follow. I was like, there's an auto observer. It's not quite, not yet. The robots haven't taken that yet from us.
No, that would be a cool algorithm though. So if you know anybody that can do that, shoot them over.
There you go. So with replays, I'm not sure if there's a automatically save replay option in Remastered.
Yes,
there is.
Yeah,
I just haven't checked it then. So
sure,
it exists. So at least that's something. That's to tie into a discussion now. Is there an overt intention to bring new players to the game?
Yeah, like it's.
And how are you going about that? How do you see that going?
What
do you expect?
Sure. As I was touching on earlier, I think a lot of it's the modern convenience and just even the visibility and being in the launcher, right? Like actually seeing the game amongst our other modern games instead of needing to go through essentially back channels to find it is a big way of getting a new generation's eyes on it. But the matchmaking and having your friends list better tied in and eventually those types of conveniences around it of easier to play with your buddies and things like that, I think are the first step of making it accessible. And then just like we were also talking about earlier, like you then have to decide if you love the game or not. Like you can't force people to love a game, so we'll make it an option and see if people do or don't. But you're going to get a certain level of stickiness with new players who like RTSs, and that's awesome. But again, the current dedicated community is massive. Like I don't have any worries about StarCraft suddenly evaporating or anything. There's a lot of folks that are going to be continuing to play, and we'll be here to support them.
All right, that's good. I think that covers about. So it's mostly about maintaining, but I think the visibility, like being in the. I didn't even think about that. It's in the launcher. Yeah. It's like, why are there 2 StarCrafts now? Oh yeah. Right. There you go. We'll have to see, but it does come down to each player. Really, it's up to them to enjoy the game. I guess there are other games out there. Most of which you can play on your phone, a lot of which involve cards that have other draws. But StarCraft is just not that type of game. So, but the people, and I'm sure you've seen this around the world, but the people who really like StarCraft really like StarCraft.
Yeah.
So almost, I would say more than any other game I've experienced pretty much. You have your hardcore players in every game, but the percentage of people who would consider themselves like a passionate StarCraft fan is very high.
You have to be, right? Like, it is not a game for that is casually played. Even the campaign, it's surprising to see some people struggling with, you know? Like,
I only failed one mission so far. But, so, on that point...
You'll get out of that tutorial someday.
On that point, but like you said, the campaign, is there any plan for something either like the Nova Covert Ops or co-op missions or something like that for StarCraft Remastered, or is that kind of left up to the UMS type of community?
Yeah, like I said, no plans for new content. We'll wait for that to actually be the resounding demand. You know, as long as people are still more focused on refinement of the things that we already have, I think that's where our energies are best spent.
Yeah. Well, actually, we got a very interesting question from David Angel. Now, I doubt you have a direct answer, but what are the chances of like a Brood War story character being added to Heroes of the Storm? Directly Brood, I don't know, like, is Duke in StarCraft 2?
No.
I don't think so. The Overmind.
Yeah, or Duran. There's a bunch
spoilers.
of spoilers. There's a bunch of great characters that could potentially be in Heroes. Like, that's another cool thing about Blizzard is that we aren't given kind of like mandates from on high. Each team kind of gets to decide its own destiny. So I hope the Heroes team puts characters like that in at some point. But I don't have that much visibility into what they do or sway over what they choose for their game.
Yeah. And I'm just going to touch on this because there's a question, but in case anyone didn't catch it, you are actually the senior producer of the Classic Games team, not necessarily just StarCraft Remastered. It was just the first version. So you mentioned that you already have eyes towards Warcraft 3 and you're working towards that direction.
Yeah.
You also mentioned Diablo 2 is something that could happen in the future. So just for those of you looking that way, and what, of course, StarCraft 3 as well is what you're working on right now, released next year. But that is the Classic Games team. So StarCraft Remastered will have a dedicated team. And then the Classic Games, while still being involved with StarCraft Remastered, I imagine, will have other projects they will be working on into the future, whether bringing people on to do it or shifting responsibilities. But the plan is to continue doing this with your Classic Games.
Yeah, and similarly, the first thing to do is find the voice of the player and make sure that we're starting to make the right decisions. And as I was saying, like, we just stood up that PTR and have changed the map pool and are starting to look at the balance because that's where the real demand is right now. Yes, people are asking for the remaster and things like that, but first we feel like we need to get the game right. And earlier last year we had put out the kind of the similar 1.18 versions of the game where we got them compiling on modern systems and more compatible. So like we've already been doing work on those games. We've already got I think measurable improvements to those games. We need to go through the same exercise like that. We haven't done as much.
And the process for StarCraft Remastered took about 1.5 years. It was mentioned. Yeah, and 1.5 years is, I don't know how long. I mean, I know Blizzard takes their time to make a game be what they want it to be, but 1.5 years is a long time.
Yes
and no.
Yeah, it's weird because it's not new development, really. There's core aspects, right? Like we were given the perfect game in StarCraft, and basically had to say like we can't screw this up. So there's a lot of systems we've never touched. There's the gameplay system we have never touched, right? We've never written any code in there. We've never the butterfly wings effect of if you change one line of code, maybe suddenly the Dragoons clump up and aren't derpy, and then
that would be horrifying.
Then the game's different. Yeah. So we obviously did a lot of work on the graphics engine and the renderer to get the remastered, get the 4K and all of that. But first you have to rediscover it, understand how the systems work. Like there's so much archaeology that goes into into this before.
I like that term, archaeology.
Yeah.
In reference to a game that probably couldn't really run correctly on systems developed in the 21st century.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And the other games are bigger. Like StarCraft, comparatively from a code base and all that, is much smaller. So there's only like 30 units in the game in multiplayer or something like that. It's actually very small. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you now have the base. You know what you need to do this type of thing. Obviously, you mentioned for Warcraft balance changes are on the table.
Mm-hmm.
For Diablo, there'd be a whole nother set because it's not a multiplayer game, right? So
it is.
It's not not focused around like 1v1 multiplayer.
So that's the interesting thing. A lot of the current players are PvPing. Like there's, again, like once you start to sidle up to these communities and really start to talk and understand what's kept them there, right?
That's actually a thing.
Yeah,
okay,
like
we
what's
should work on that.
kept them there is very much that same spirit of competition of like, yeah, I do want to get the best gear, but it's mostly just so I can kill you easier.
All right. Well, so you already have. There's already been discussions and like thoughts about what these things could be, and in the future, I think we all know the direction this is going. So, thank you.
I
for
have no comment.
You have no comment. No.
Winter is coming.
Thank you for that. I think we'll open it up a little bit more.
Sure.
I think we've talked about everything remastered and some things that could be remastered, and
Gonna get me in trouble, man.
I'm good at that. But we're gonna take some open questions from anybody who has questions that are actually.
Hype 345. I am sorry, we do not currently have any Linux designs. I'm sorry. I know there's a few very vocal folks about that, but.
What? Okay, here's your question. You answer at the introduction of like the team meeting.
Yeah.
Pete, what's your biggest satisfaction in the making of StarCraft Remastered, and what's your biggest regret about something you wish to implement but can't do it yet?
This is going to sound like overly sentimental, but honestly, my biggest satisfaction has been working with the community and I think by and large getting it right. And getting to have a window into, what other people find important about the game. Like we all, like I was talking about earlier, like we have these shared experiences. There's a reason we're all plugged in and connected and love StarCraft. But like getting in touch with why you love it or whoever, I get a lot of motivation and drive out of. And like I was saying, like I feel like I'm a conduit to the rest of the team for that type of stuff. And getting to represent that is like this kind of sacred honor, and that's what's probably given me the most mileage during the entire process. What was the other half of the question?
What is
biggest regret?
Well, I don't know if it was. We'll just say, what's your biggest regret of StarCraft Remastered? Not anything feature related. What's your biggest regret?
Not feature related.
Not feature related.
What does that leave?
I don't know. Be creative. What's one thing or people maybe you wanted to involve but weren't able to get as involved?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I come from a more agile development background, so stupid words like MVP, minimum viable product, things like that of kind of like what's the core experience, and get that out there quickly, and then iterate and don't pretend you have all the answers. Like I think we're doing that really well. But I think we've gotten some criticism of like, oh, you didn't do it the Blizzard way, which was kind of having everything in a certain state.
It's not finished on arrival necessarily, or it's not finished in how you would like it to be.
Right. It's tough because it was already a live product. Like this wasn't launching Overwatch or something like that. Like we already had a dedicated community that loved it, and we were trying to just keep the ball rolling because the other side of that coin is what takes you so long. So it's a catch-22. And
well, what about features then? What is the feature that isn't out yet that you are most looking forward to?
Not necessarily that it's not out, but maybe one of the big areas that I wish we could have figured out was EUD. So the extended unit death is a method. It's a buffer overflow for memory that can be used for very evil things. in the right person's hands that was also used to make some really cool maps, some really cool tower defense and other maps through this kind of exploit, essentially, to get the game to do things that it normally wouldn't have. But again, like, it's a massive security gap that we had to close, and especially with the renewed, eyes on it and things like that. Like, we as a responsible, citizen can't allow you to be invaded, right? So that, like I was talking about, not wanting to leave people out in the cold, not wanting to leave people behind. Like, that, this is probably, maybe my biggest regret, that EUD is just a broken part of the game, and we kind of had to close the door on it.
But you left in Terran.
And that sucks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't play Brood War in the day, I guess, and there are probably a lot of those little things that either were fixed or changed, especially when it comes to UMS. I imagine you weren't as strict about preserving everything exactly how it was when it comes to
actually,
not the 1v1 multiplayer.
By and large, replays still work from 1.16, right? Like, we've done really, I think the engineers have done an amazing job keeping the game compatible with those old replays. There's 10 plus years of replays from that era and custom maps made during that era, and as long as they don't have EUD in it, they still work. So I think that's one of those crowning achievements that showed we really didn't change the game. We really didn't modify the balance, because that's the fastest way to break replays is if you change the balance or anything like that.
The units don't work how they're supposed to. Nothing goes the right place.
Because if the damage is suddenly higher, then that unit should be dead, not still on the battlefield or something like that.
I'm not particularly sure what these issues are, but any plans to fix the port forwarding issues?
There shouldn't be.
They should be fixed?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It may be if you're turning off the Bonjour, that may be preventing the port forwarding from working properly. Like, that's what Bonjour is really doing, is helping solve that, so that LAN is easier, and that's interesting. DTFL, if you have more details on that.
Or any
I mean,
any
honestly,
particular experiences.
No, like, no joke. Go put it on the tech forum, and we'll look into it. Hey, TT1, how you doing, man?
Talking about cross-region lag, we touched on that, but where did that land?
I think the short answer is, like, we want to look into the tech that would make it elastic, essentially, so that we would see if you have a worse connection with someone, or if it starts to be variable during the cast because your buddy starts to torrent something or whatever, is watching HBO, watching Game of Thrones, and that's suddenly eating up some of your bandwidth. So it's a ton of work, though, because it is a peer-to-peer game, and it wasn't designed to have one of our servers kind of be an intermediary checking those types of things and making it work. So it's a technology our server engineers are very interested in resolving, but no, like, set timeline or anything like that on it.
Okay. So how does matchmaking work with regards to that? Does it kind of register your location, or at least where it thinks you're playing from? And
speaking of things that are up for debate right now, that's why we set the turn rate to 8 to try to deal with the fact that you might be very far apart and still have a stable game. But right now, the players essentially need to understand that when it happens, they should go to the options menu and change to extra high latency to deal with it, which the hardcore players know about. The newer audience might not.
Don't know.
And that's where an awesome community like this will start to educate people over time. That's where the chat channels can still be, I think, a really positive influence by when people say, hey, why is my stuff lagging? Like, help them out.
And then the Brood War community developed a lot of plugins for the game that won't work with Remastered since it broke the ABI. And when it's an acronym, I assume you know and I don't. But are there plans for additional plugins inspired by community tools or an official API?
I think you meant API, not ABI.
Oh.
We have been talking to some folks from the Brood War API scene, so we're super interested in it. Can
you give an example of, like, one sort of program or plugin that you're looking at?
No, because we should make it generic enough that it doesn't matter, that it's an endpoint then that you can make work with that endpoint, which is cool, because then anybody, it unlocks more power, right? like I think it would be epic to have AI leagues and things like that. Like I think it'd be super cool because there's a bunch of universities around the world that have like an annual Brood War AI competition, right? So I think unlocking that, like it'd be cool to just watch that sometimes. You know, it's like Robot Wars.
But in the game. What's it like to work on a game you don't know?
You know,
what
doesn't
did you
need
do
any balance.
before?
Yeah.
Did you work at Blizzard before Classic Games?
Yes. Yeah, I was at Blizzard for 3.5 years before Classic Games. So I thought it was cool that we were given this perfect game, so we had to find other ways to drive the engagement. It let us focus on Matchmaker. It let us, you know, look at the systems and say, like, what does make this accessible to a new generation? What are the modern conveniences that it's missing? And the part that, you know, slowed us down was that it took so much work to actually just make things work the same way that they already did. Like, chat channels are not supported by, you know, the current incarnation of modern Battle.net, right? So we had to do all of this work to bring that technology with the game, and why you can still talk to people in Warcraft 3 and Diablo. Like, it ended up being a massive amount of work to kind of not deprecate a bunch of features, and that, you know, ate up a lot of our time, and it's why we have, I think, a lot of really good plans that are ready right now to start development. Like I said, once everything's in a state that the community's happy with. But I just looked at it as an opportunity to make sure we got things right, and to put a lot of energy into the other things that sometimes don't get as much energy because you are focused on, you know, making the best possible game, and those other things become kind of secondary or tertiary priorities.
I think you did answer this in some way, but are there plans for an in-game shop to help support the community? The summary is that skins are an issue because a lot of people play on less than ideal computers, and not everybody would be able to partake. And then nothing else you said right now is like this is going to be a new cosmetic type of thing, or an in-game shop. I mean, just play the game. Are you planning on giving Twitch streamers any tools to help communities play together? I can't imagine. I don't know what those would be. I make a chat channel. And
I honestly just recently became aware of this, that like there are APIs that will see what state the game is in, and then maybe automatically minimize it and bring you up full. Like it makes your job easier. I know you're professional and you don't need the help.
Of course
you're
not.
Good.
I play Brood War.
But it could give you a much more kind of refined, you know, method of things automatically happening and things like that. So we've just become aware of it. We're looking into it. That to me will end up in that kind of laundry list of here are the things that we're planning on doing, and it'll get prioritized.
That's a good question. Are there any plans on supporting clans or even something like groups?
Yeah, like we definitely look at even some of the, you know, the classics that were published a little bit later and see some of their features that we want in StarCraft. So again, that is high on the making it socially easier to play the game and
Do you
have dedicated areas.
Like a general ETA on these, like within a year, within 6 months?
No, because I'm not going to do that to my engineers. Like, ultimately, it's...
but they're working on it.
I can sit here and get the joy of talking and presenting and being the face, but they're doing the heavy lifting,
Soon?
And I don't want to... no, I'm not going to say that either. That's just evil. Like I said, give us a few weeks, and we'll start heavily communicating what we're looking at doing. And
do you have a plan, kind of like the StarCraft 2 community does, a weekly kind of feedback / update kind of thing? Not necessarily about balance, but just about this what's up kind of blog post. Are there any plans for something like that, or even like maybe bi-weekly or monthly, that people can expect on this date we'll know maybe a little bit more than we knew last month?
No, that's a cool idea, though. Like, it's a great suggestion.
There you go.
Yeah, no, like... yeah, we're open to being better. Like, we want to be better.
Any plans to combine East and West, since U.S. West seems to be where everyone who's not from Europe or Korea congregates. Just like in SC2 now, the Americas server encompasses like Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Japan.
Yeah.
So, but
yeah, so they're different data centers. Like one's in LA, one's in Chicago. So like they are very separate places to connect to. I know everybody wants that pool to be put together, but it kind of already is from the respect if you're using Matchmaker that we are looking globally for the pool.
I think we're talking more about like chat channels.
No, I get that. I get that. But again, like from a quality of life experience thing, like if you're in New York and you connect to Chicago versus LA, like your latency is going to be better. It's going to be a better experience. Like there are also good benefits to having them. Like we don't have any plans to combine them at the moment. So yeah.
Is another thing on that laundry list. Expect like more info on your stats in general, like
yes,
maps,
yeah,
win rate on maps and stuff like
yes,
that.
100%. We have a lot of plans for profile to get deeper and have cooler stuff. Automatic replays out of the profile page and things like that. Yeah. There you go.
Right, it's that one.
Yeah.
That's the one you clicked. But yeah.
How much have you felt about Blizzard historical figures developers being emotionally involved in the SCR project development? Blizzard's super lucky to have a lot of lifers, whatever you want to call it. So we leaned a lot into those guys.
This is broken, by the way. But, yeah.
What's broken about it?
Oh, I don't have an average APM of 266. A couple weeks ago, it's at like 3,400, like 3,040. Yeah, it was pretty good for me. There's already a lot of stats on this page. As you're about to go talk about the Blizzard dynasty of people who've been there for 20 years.
Sorry,
this is broken.
When you said it's broken,
fix it.
That's a trigger. That's a trigger for me. So, the guys that helped create that helped create the game originally, that were even had left the company, we reached out to, and whether it was the art and talking to Sammy and being like, hey, what is this little cross right here? And he goes, oh, that's the dude sitting in the turret, right? So like those 4 pixels to him.
Yeah, there's a dude in the turret, everybody.
Yeah, those 4 pixels to him were like the face mask of the guy in the turret, right? Like, and that was in his imagination, and that's what he was trying to impart, with the 80 pixels or whatever it was that he was given for the turret. And with Remastered, we got the opportunity to actually put the dude in the turret, and he's sitting there, probably vomiting in his helmet from spinning, but he's sitting there, to defend against the mutas.
That's a question. Could players potentially at some point use a single profile, like I assume with the same rank stats and all of that, to connect to different gateways?
Probably not. Just from
someone stole my name on US West, but I got it on Asia?
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of it, right, is that you then lose a lot of uniqueness in name, in that you have, 5 times as many options.
Probably
I don't know.
not.
Well, but you kind of, I keep falling back on it, but in a lot of ways, that's what the global matchmaking is doing. Like, you just have to play the one tune, and wherever you're playing
I think we're all talking about the social thing now, I guess.
Oh, I see.
Because you can only join custom lobbies from your gateway, am I correct?
I see. Yeah, so
that's the big...
You're almost saying, give me a character, and then I can choose where I'm going to be placing that character today. Yeah.
We don't even really have that in StarCraft 2, technically.
Yeah.
But I guess the idea was in the original Brood War, everybody just has like unlimited accounts on all these like Fish and IC Cup. And I just see all the time, just new account, new name. Nobody knows all the 24 names someone has. Right. So you didn't want to tie it into like your battle tag is now your profile all the time, because you get 3 accounts per gateway is the limit, right? So
well, you should still have that opportunity for a little bit of creativity and anonymity, or the account that you want to go test a new style on and not tank, the MMR of the other one. Like, we wanted to give some flexibility, but we also didn't want that of just rampant, constant, creation of garbage accounts and people trolling or whatever, right? Like, to us, it was striking kind of a balance.
I remember during what was it, 1.18, I believe, when /ignore didn't work. So that was a fun day. But
you're welcome.
Matchup picking is a hot topic on the phone. Any plans of allowing people to play specific matchups? Of course, you're on a ranked ladder with MMR is the concern.
Yeah, but that also breaks it if you decide who you play. Like,
If you suck terribly at TVT,
well,
and you
that
just
to
don't play
me, that
TVT.
to me, like reinforces the argument for an unmatched rank or unmatched ladder or something like that, where
Which
you could.
I still think SC2 on unranked, you should be able to pick your matchup,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
But is that a possibility, you think, with maybe an unranked system?
It's it's a possibility.
It's not on the table right now.
Let's get 1v1 right first, and then we can focus on the next big things, because those become big things, right?
All right. So not so soon is the bottom line on that one. Any chance for MMR to be hidden in SC2 style ranks? I don't think. I can speak for someone who plays SC2 and someone who's starting to play Brood War. I think the people who would want their MMR hidden with just some arbitrary rank that you don't actually know, like when you're moving up, is in the single digits.
Yeah. Yeah, but no plans to address the question head on, and we're thinking of the letter grades that have become more the norm through Fish and other matchmakers instead of the
I think that's the way to
bronze.
go. Will more support for left-handed players be coming soon?
Yeah, that came up yesterday too, and I countered with we're hoping to have a colorblind mode soon, because we do want to support people that are playing differently. So that honestly hadn't come up until yesterday. So it's officially on my mind, but we'll have to get home and talk to the engineers about what it would be like where you'd flip the equivalent of the escape key to, or I'm sure there's standards out there already, but what that would take from a technology standpoint.
A new player cannot play with computer players spawning at close positions on the map. Are there plans to allow co-start positions? That sounds like a make a forum thread and someone will see it type of.
Yeah, and that is something that isn't like a unique request right now. Like we've seen that on the forums. We've already seen people talking about it. I think it's a cool, good idea.
And map pools in the future, will there be a map of the week, I believe is what that acronym is, kind of system? Or has there been a decision on that?
We don't have anything in place yet, but I even want to maybe open up for map creation competitions and things like that. I think it'd be super exciting to give more voice to the people that are making amazing maps and have competitions and let the community decide what they want to be playing.
And, I mean, we already touched on it, but it was a while back. Like, Blizzard right now, when it comes to supporting Brood War, like in a WCS-style system, you said it's a possibility, but there's nothing in place right now. You're just going to continue to support, like, ASL in Korea, the established leagues that are there, and actually regrowing. Once again, I'm not sure when the next ASL starts up, but that'll be the first remastered one. They'll all be playing on remastered, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And plans to separate stats, wins and losses for matchmaking and custom games. That makes sense.
Oh, I see what you're asking. As opposed to
this, like for example, this is my including custom games.
Right.
All 1v1.
Yeah,
but
make it seasonal based and things like that. Yes, we do.
That will be with the season reset.
Right.
Is the plan. All right. Well, so when is controller support coming?
Right after we port it back to N64. Silverleaf.
There will be an update in ramps in general, and just updates to the editor, which are soon. But they're happening. Just it's a matter of when.
The custom ramps are like imminent. Like they're very close to done. They're variable width, so you can make ramps as wide as you want. They also have more cardinal directions, so you can go up, straight up, sideways, whatever.
Okay, most of these questions were answered in the first hour. I think we're a couple in right now, but so if you have a legitimate question, and we don't answer it directly or spend time on it, it's probably because we answered it in the first hour or so, where we just covered all the basic plans for matchmaking and esports and observing and the editor and UMS and all of that. So, like how team games are next up after 1v1's figured out, and then potentially like matchmaking for custom maps is on the table. Is Korea one important? Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Korea is.
The short answer is yes. We talked quite a bit about Korea at the beginning.
Yeah.
I found that to be, like I was talking about earlier, kind of learning more about the fan base and the community was really rewarding for me. So, if that's available for people to go back to and listen to us talking about that, I think it, like when I watched WoW, the Looking for Group documentary, like that resonated for me as a player as much as just like, hey, that's a cool human story. And I feel like Korea has this kind of like Looking for Group story that everybody that's a gamer that appreciates this game should plug into and like really understand. It's just awesome. And I got to experience that firsthand. And I whenever we talk about Korea, I try to kind of pass on some of that knowledge. And if you check out the beginning, you should be able to see that.
Why did they not give the appearance to differentiate between regular units and hero units?
Oh, like in the original developers, why is Raynor just a different color? Probably memory constraints. Like
we only have 50. No, how many? 64 megs of RAM. Like
yeah, well, and not just that, but keep in mind you had to put it on a disc that didn't have that much space on it. Also, the original units had twice as many angles, which is why one of the options now is to use them. But they ended up cutting them out to save memory. So yeah, like that's why the vultures look like they're attacking like a ship, as they're driving along, because they had to cut out half of the angles to just be able to ship the game at the right size. So we put them back in, like basically at no effort other than rendering those in to have them. Another one of those just like cool things that during that archaeology period we discovered, like, oh, they have this, why wouldn't they use it? And then they were like, well, think about it, like how big was it? It's too big.
What's your favorite StarCraft unit?
Ooh. That's an interesting question.
That's the longest he's taken to answer a question.
Yeah.
In 2 hours.
Well, I'm very reflective, so I'm worried that it'll be ready to or something. You're gonna
somehow offend somebody.
Yeah. Like from just like a pure aesthetics and like that's a cool unit. Like the Goliath has always been pretty amazing to me, and the Reaver's like just so cool.
So the Reaver.
Yeah,
it's the Reaver.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We got it.
And then from a gameplay perspective, the Scarab sometime missing make it an interesting unit, right? Like
it's a feature.
It's a cool unit. Yeah, it is a feature.
Except if you're the Protoss who really needs to kill those SCVs.
Yeah.
Right now, some settings are not saved across the game. Video settings sometimes cannot be saved. That sounds like bug report form.
Yeah, but those are actively being fixed. So we've done 2 patches this week fixing items like that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have all those little stupid little mistakes healed up.
2v2 is on deck after 1v1 is ironed out. That's the plan for those asking about 2v2. Automated tournaments, like in SC2.
Or like in War 3, maybe.
They have those?
Yeah. So they're different though. Like they're more like, hey, they reoccur every week at this time. Whereas with SC2,
every couple hours.
Yeah. To us, it's a cool thing we should have at some point. No timeline on it. And to get a little bit more into the twos, like we wanted to make sure like I was saying, it's a new ELO system, so we want to make sure we were getting MMR right before we added the complexity of multiple people matching up and trying to do twos right. So once we're cool with ones, we'll start looking at the added complexity of more.
All right. Was the deadline hard set in time?
Can you make an algorithm to match chronic cheesers against each other?
If your average game time is under 6 minutes, you'll only play other people who have an average game time of under 6 minutes.
It's like the hero levers matching. Yeah. Is the deadline hard set in time?
Well, that I remember it being mentioned. This summer was to make sure that while it was released this summer, it was released when it was done.
Like
or
this,
as close as
this
possible.
sounds silly, but like the Blizzard that made these games originally was much more regressive on their timelines, and they used to put games out much more frequently. And we kind of wanted to channel that as the owners of these games. So we did set an aggressive timeline and try to hit it. And there are some minor nits that we're working through that, of course, we wish we'd caught them earlier. But another thing we're learning is that the value of the PTR is high because there are so many different systems and there are so many different configurations, and that tends to be where a lot of this stuff breaks down. But one of the issues was with 19, the deeper in we got, the less people were on the PTR, and then we weren't catching as much. So, unfortunately, when we pushed it live, there were a few things we wish we'd caught sooner, just to take that on the chin and admit it. But like I said, we're dedicated. We're fixing things. We're here until it's done, and then beyond. So, yeah.
All right. I think we'll take a couple more questions. A lot of your questions have been answered in one form or another over the last couple hours. As a die-hard Brood War fan and avid UMS player, thank you, Pete. The remaster is perfect. You've been leaving everything alone and makes it amazing. That's what Brood War players want. Just leave us alone and, well, give us a makeover and then leave us alone.
Yeah. Toaster, thank you. But it's like I said, I'm maybe the voice of the team or whatever you want to call it. But I cannot speak highly enough of the amazing engineers, amazing testers, CS, the guys in BattleNet, everybody at Blizzard that helped us ship it. Beyond the dedicated team, even it was an amazing experience on many fronts. But they're the guys who really deserve the thanks, but thanks, Toaster.
Adding /draw for the odd super laggy. I feel like that's something that's probably been brought up before.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to solve there. I think there's better ways with technology than again adding manual steps. I think we should be able to focus on
in the leaderboards. There are no random players, not because you can't pick random. It's because it's just way too hard to play and they're not at the top. That's actually why there are random players.
Yeah.
On the ladder, they just are not as good. That's how it is. All right, so everyone asking about anything matchmaking related, I think we've covered all angles on that. What it is, what it's going to be, what it's planned, and if there are any last questions about anything we have, I think we've gone over.
It's been a good chat.
Everything.
Yeah. Hey, you only made me uncomfortable a few times.
It's about average.
It's good.
Good job, Twitch chat as well.
Yeah.
That. Brood War Mobile.
I can't even imagine that. Would that be...
The OBS mode have the minimap player's vision box feature, with this feature be implemented in replays as a learning and anti-cheat tool?
Yeah, we touched on that a tiny bit earlier, but we'd really, really like to get all of the features into replays and then some. Like I was saying, I think we don't necessarily want to break the observer mode's sense of anticipation by not knowing what's in the production tab, but when you're in a replay, I think it's cool to be able to see the production tab and really be able to analyze what's happening if you're trying to figure out the guy's strategy that just beat you and understand what he was doing and how you need to adjust next time. I think the more information in real time, the better, than having to go to the recap at the end. Sorry, I'm spinning a lot.
Yeah, it's been a bit. It's been a bit now. But
you're a rock star, man. I don't know how you spend so many hours doing it. We appreciate it.
You made it easy. All right. I think we've beaten every horse to death, let it lay 20 years, then remastered it and answered all the questions.
Yeah.
So if you guys, we talked about pretty much everything throughout the last 2 hours. If you look in the VOD, everybody can watch my VODs. I'm not a sellout like Loco.
Wow. Shots fired.
So you can check that out. I'll try to get it uploaded, but it'll probably take a day or two. But thank you, everyone, for watching the interview. And, of course, anything you want to say, Pete, the senior producer of classic games at Blizzard.
We love you guys. Thank you so much for being so active and so vocal. Like, it really does actually make our jobs easier to have people that do have an opinion and who help us make this game better. So thank you. Keep talking to us on the forums. Like, even if I'm not posting every day, I'm reading every day, and trying to listen and get a true perspective on things before we start making statements and before, we make bad decisions or whatever. No, we're trying not to make knee-jerk reactions. So continue to interface with us and with yourselves, and we'll be here. Like I said, we're going to continue development, and everything we're talking about right now is going to be factored into those next steps, and we're super excited for it. Can't wait for you guys to continue on the journey with us. So thanks, guys.
Can I get some thanks, Pete, some hearts, some butter my biscuits in the chat? But thank you again for this wasn't awkward at all.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was reading. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, man. I really appreciate the time and the critique. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your work again.
Yeah.